In November of 2021, I got recommended to watch a particular anime series in order to help me better understand it, as well as help edit a friend of mine's video. This is JoJo's Bizarre Adventures, a manga series created by Hirohiko Araki in 1987 with his first part of Phantom Blood. This follows the story of Jonathan Joestar and his family throughout the decades. And since then, the series has continued and is now on its 9th part of JoJo Lands. Now, I had heard a lot about this series, as well as seen all the memes, and let's be real here, even if you're not a JoJo fan, you've at least seen some of these memes on the internet. But I never thought about picking up the series or even reading the manga. In fact, back in 2012, I was tempted to give the show a start. But due to the company I kept, as well as my mind frame and various other reasons that I don't want to list, I was persuaded not to try the series, or even pick it up for that matter. Thankfully, that is no longer the case, and as mentioned earlier, I was recommended to give the series a try. What I experienced was truly one of the most bizarrest series I've ever experienced, and since then, it is now my favourite anime/manga series of all time. Thank you for that, Dove.
Now that we've gotten all the mushy stuff out of the way, it's time we move on to the topic of today's video. Today we'll be taking a look at all the console releases of the video games based around JoJo's Bizarre Adventures, starting all the way back to the SNES to its current game. Now before I get started, there's a few things I need to mention. Firstly, I'm only going to be talking about the games that I can play, so games like Last Survivor, the mobile games, and Roblox fan games won't be included. While I know I can technically play the Roblox ones, I just choose not to, because as I mentioned, those are fan games and not officially licensed ones, while the others are pretty much self-explanatory. Secondly, I'm going to issue a spoiler warning right here, because I will be talking in great detail about the story in certain, or if not all, storylines from each part. Plus, certain games do go into spoiler territory too, so if you don't want to get spoiled on everything, there's your warning. Also, please read or watch JoJo. It's one of the best fictional stories I've ever experienced. Trust me, it's that good.
Onwards with the video, and first up is the game released onto the Super Famicom as well as the SNES, simply titled JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Now, sadly this game never released outside of Japan, and it primarily focuses on the events of Part 3, Stardust Crusaders.
Now, because this game was never released outside of Japan, I'll be playing primarily the fan English patch version for the video. Now, as mentioned a few seconds ago, the game's story follows the events of Part 3, where Jotaro and his companions travel the world to put a stop to the evil vampire lord, Dio, while also saving Jotaro's mother in the process. Now, it does take some liberties with changing a few bits, like removing certain story elements and characters, as well as adding a few bits to better suit the gameplay experience. For example, the stand Empress doesn't appear, some story beats are out of order, Ferrera's stand, Strength, takes the form of a mansion instead of a boat. Oingo and Boingo don't use their respective stands, but joins forces with Alissi? And that's just scratching the surface on what changes were made. What does that mean for the rest of the game? Well, surprisingly enough, it means that you get a well-constructed and thought-out experience. The art style is sweet and really nails Araki's style, which is impressive considering you'll need one of these in order to see everything. But I'm guessing that this was a stylistic choice as it allows the developers to use more higher quality assets. Also, to the game's credit, that doesn't mean the whole screen isn't used, as at the bottom you'll have the whole team present and you can switch between each character during fights. The top screen is also used, but mostly just to show off the main villain Dio hidden in shadow. The game is a unique combination of side-scrolling RPG and point-and-click adventures, and in my opinion, it uses both assets quite well, especially during its gameplay, as you have 4 options to choose from, such as Check, which allows you to look around the room and click on things to find hidden items, Talk, which is self-explanatory, Item, which again is pretty self-explanatory, And finally Tarot, which allows the player to look at tarot cards used in the manga, and also allows one of the main characters, after all, to examine and explain about the items you've received to let you know how good they are. I will say it's a shame that you don't get a little small description about the items you find, but that's just me being a little nitpicky on the game. When exploring, you're only able to move left and right and also forward and backwards to change scenes. And that's it. I will say I did get a little confused on where I could go, as I was stuck in Jotaro's house for quite some time, as I am embarrassed to admit I didn't see the small arrow at the top of the screen indicating to me where I could go. So yeah, that's on me, but also make the arrow bigger.
You know, it's a real shame that this game was never released overseas, because while the complaints I have mentioned do hold it back, as well as its age, I can see this being a lot of people's favourite, and it's just a fun little game.
Moving swiftly along, how does the combat hold up? Well, in my humblest opinion, it's not the greatest, but still incredibly fun. You see, when the battle begins, the first thing you do is pick a random tarot card from a set of 5, which can either help you with increasing stats or refilling health, or they can help your enemies by raising your stress level, decreasing strength, etc, etc. Now, while these are all completely random, I did find myself picking more of the bad cards instead of the good ones. To be fair though, this is mostly just my own luck rather than the game's fault, so yeah, don't blame the game there. But it doesn't stop me from trying. Combats are turn-based, which is pretty common in RPGs if you couldn't already tell. And while they ain't the most engaging, they are pretty serviceable, and the attack animations from the stands and characters are really good. The options are attack, talk, items, and check. Now with attack, it's pretty self-explanatory, as your character uses a stand to attack the enemies. Like I said, self-explanatory. Talk is an interesting mechanic, as when you press it, your character can shoot insults at the enemies, and that can either make them lose MP or just give up. I've never actually seen this before. Is this actually common in some RPGs? Seriously, I don't know. Is this a common thing? Items, once more, is self-explanatory, as this allows you to heal, use power-ups, etc, etc. You get the point. Now, check is also an interesting mechanic, as this allows the player to use situational commands. However, while this is a cool command to have, I do also feel it wasn't properly utilized. Like during the nurse's fight, you're trying to fight back, but you are meant to press the check button in order to pull Kakuin's stand out. I tried it once and it didn't work, leading me to believe it wasn't the right thing to try. But after exhausting all other options, I tried it once again, and lo and behold, it worked, and this finishes the fight. I don't know if this is normal for the game, but it did get annoying after a few attempts, as this wasn't the last time. Apart from that, the presentation of the fights are just brilliant, especially for this style of game. Also, it's kind of cool that every stand has some voices. No, seriously, it really caught me by surprise to hear Star Platinum shouting out his iconic Ura sound. This whole game's presentation, with its sounds, visuals, and the way they were able to give us a consistent story with the limitations they took, is honestly brilliant. Sure, it has aged in some areas, but I think that's part of its charm, and I would personally love to see this game come back as a remaster or remake one day. Hey, I know we're tired of the whole remaster/remakes, but this game is one of the exceptions in my opinion. With updated sounds, graphics, and visuals, and get rid of this, movie screen aesthetic, I think this game would be an instant classic. No, seriously, this is the only thing I'm kind of mixed on. Even if it is a stylistic choice, you can barely see anything. But as for the rest of the game, it's just a blast. I highly recommend it.
Next up is the PS1 version of the arcade classic, simply titled JoJo's Venture, or JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Wait, isn't that the same as the Super Famicom?
Now, this game turned out to be more difficult to obtain than I imagined. As while the Dreamcast version is sometimes easy to get, but still can be a little pricey, and the US and Japanese versions are at reasonable prices, the European versions are... oh my god! I knew this was a rare game, but wow! Those are insane price tags, people.
Naturally, after learning how pricey it is to get your hands on a physical copy, I just ended up emulating it because who on earth has that kind of money to pay for that game? I mean, honestly, you'd have to be a completely stupid idiot. Oh, God. I'm joking, this isn't JoJo's. No, I'm serious, this isn't JoJo's. I'm not. This is Marvel vs. Capcom for the PS1. I mean, look, look. This is nothing but a joke. Nothing but a big fat joke. Like my channel.
Also, I need to be clear that I am very well aware of all the other versions of this game, but I'll primarily be playing the PS1 version of this game. Because if I was to dive into all versions of this game, let's just say I'm still recovering from my last video and I don't want to dive too deep again. But I will say one thing about the now delisted HD version of this. They really buggered up the artwork with its smudged filter. Moving on now. Well, to start things off, the opening credits are really stylish and very cool. It kind of gives me part 1 opening vibes and I'm all here for it. The main menu is a little disappointing, but still very JoJo, and to be honest, I got used to it over time. There are many options to choose from Super Story Mode, Arcade, Versus Mode for those that have friends, and I have many. A training mode, which to be honest was a very welcome addition, as I don't play a lot of fighting games anymore, so I was able to try out all the characters to get used to them. There is also a gallery mode and a book mode? What? But just a heads up, you won't be able to view gallery or book mode until you've completed the main story mode. Now, speaking of the story mode, it pretty much covers the whole of part 3, while of course taking a few liberties here and there. Seems to be a continuing trend. You can pretty much sum up how they tell the story as cutscene encounter, fight, another cutscene, fight, rinse, and repeat. But they do break the formula up in some parts. Some of those include cutscene battles like with Dark Blue Moon, where all you do is move either left or right to avoid his attacks to continue the cutscene. Other fights like with Strength turns into a rail shooter segment? Honestly, I did not expect this. And it is a pretty easy segment, but just be careful where you shoot punch, as you could accidentally hit Anne. Whether it's different in the original arcade, Dreamcast, or any of the other versions, I have no clue. But I was told that in one of the versions you can play as the other characters in story mode and get their own endings. Which would have been nice to have here too, as I'd love to see Iggy's ending. That dog deserved better and you know it. This game is such a fun treat, and you can really tell the developers put a lot of time and effort into making this game a classic. But that's no surprise, as this was developed by Capcom, who are of course no strangers to making brilliant fighting games. The character sprites are spot on, very well detailed, animated so smoothly, and really makes you feel like you're playing a JoJo game. Also, the character select screen is probably one of my absolute favourite additions to the game, as it's designed like a manga panel for all the characters. I also discovered that if you scroll to the left or the right of the character select screen, you'll find 2 hidden characters to play, and these are Dio, Hidden Shadows, and of course the man, the myth, the legendary GOAT himself, young Joseph Joestar. Nice! Which was an awesome surprise for me, as Joseph is my favourite JoJo, so naturally I played him in the versus mode quite a bit. One thing I completely forgot to mention about the story mode is that the game has a post-match results screen, which more or less shows how well you did during the fight, as well as if you've unlocked any secrets called secret factors. The secret factors can be enabled by completing certain hidden requirements during the levels. The only gripe I have with this game is for some reason some stands appear to be slightly faded, especially with Star Platinum. Look at how faded he is. I don't understand why some of the stands look like this, while others almost look decent. From what I can tell, this look is only found in the PlayStation version, as when looking up screenshots for the game, I can see them looking a lot better and even more colourful. But that's the only problem I have with this game, as everything else presentation-wise is just stunning. Alright, I think I've talked enough about this game, so let's move on. But before I do, I just want to send a little message to Capcom. Please release the HD version of modern consoles, as I know myself and many others would buy this game in a heartbeat. Okay, on to the next one.
Next up, we jump into the next console in line, the Sony PlayStation 2, where 2 games were released onto their said console. So let's jump right into the first one, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Golden Wind, or as some people like to call it, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Vento Oreo, or JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Vento Oreo / Golden Wind, or as I like to call it, JoJo no Kimi no Boke, One no Kaze. Jesus Christ, there's so many names to this one!
Before I jump into the game, I wanted to mention that unlike the last 2 titles I've talked about, I'll only be going to cover this and the next one as briefly as I can, as my good friend Mistress already made a video on both this and Phantom Blood for PS2, and she covers both games in fantastic detail. So if you want to watch a more in-depth look into both titles, I highly recommend you watch Dub's video. Okay, advertisement over, onto my opinions on them. Once again, we have Capcom to thank for this game, and by God, this game still looks great even today. Now, sadly, like the first title I talked about, this game wasn't released outside of Japan, but it was originally going to be and was even teased at E3 in 2002. And then it was cancelled, which really sucks. So, like the SNES title, I'll be playing a fan translation of the game. The game pretty much goes through the entire story of Part 5, while also taking some liberties to progress the story. I'm beginning to notice, like the scene where Giorno is given the flame trial by Polpo, as that has been completely skipped over, as well as Doppio's fight with Risotto, and Koichi's part is completely gone and never mentioned.
Oh god, don't tell Yukiko.
Also, at the beginning of the game, it quickly does a synopsis of parts 1 through 4, which was a really nice detail to add, as it makes the game more accessible to those knowing very little about the JoJo series. Or even just a nice refresher for us veterans. But in hindsight, it does a very good job at adapting the narrative of the part. The cutscenes are split into 2 ways. Some are presented in the game's engine, which can be pretty dynamic in some scenes, while the rest are presented in a manga / comic book style, which I think was a nice touch. All fully voice acted too. Now, I bet you're all wondering what the plot is. Well, as mentioned, it covers the whole of JoJo's Part 5, where we see Giorno Giovanna, a young man with a dream. A dream to become a gangster, and we see him achieve this as the game progresses. Side note, every time when I say gangster, I immediately about to say gangster, so that was incredibly difficult on my... The game itself is a 3D action beat 'em up. The maps are very open where you can freely roam around the area, and every level is pretty much a boss fight. No, seriously, every fight you have is pretty much a one-on-one boss battle every time. And while there are a few different gameplay elements to splice things up, they're either very annoying or the worst part of the game. I really hated this part, god fucking damn it. But that doesn't make anything else about this game bad, as nearly every fight you have in the game is enjoyable, true to the source material, and very special. Take the fight for instance with Illujo with both Fugo and Abakio, where you're fighting him with flipped controls in the real world and the mirror world. While admittedly it does get a little frustrating at times, I actually found this fight to be quite enjoyable and challenging. To be honest, I'm probably the only one who will proudly say I enjoyed the challenge of this fight compared to others. Each character is unique in their fights and nobody plays the same, apart from the running animations of course, but all in all, this game is a pretty fun and enjoyable time, and it is a shame that this was never released worldwide, because I can clearly see this game being a well-beloved classic. Unfortunately, I probably won't be saying the same for the next one.
Next up is Phantom Blood for the PS2, and oh boy, this is truly something else.
Now, I won't lie, I wanted to give this game the benefit of the doubt. I knew it wasn't going to be great and wanted to really find something that others haven't already mentioned, and was fully expecting my opinion to be completely different. This game really sucks. The gameplay is simple and it's another beat 'em up, but the camera is your worst enemy. As the game doesn't have a dedicated lock-on, you'll be wrestling with the camera in order to properly fight the enemies, while also being timed. Because of course this game has a time limit during combat. Speaking of the combat, it was very stale and boring, as you're endlessly guarding from the enemy's attacks and waiting for a full opportunity to attack back, which wastes more time. Did I mention the time limit? What doesn't help the game's case anymore is that every enemy you fight always perfectly times their dodges to your attack, which leads you to getting hit over and over again. You're pretty much useless until learning Hammond from Zeppeli, but that's not until chapter 8 of the game. Now, after learning Hammond, the game becomes a little more tolerable, but it sadly doesn't save it. Also, fair warning, this game is full of cutscenes. Like, seriously, there are a lot of cutscenes. So many that I'd recommend you just watch the anime or read the manga. As that is, to quote the Wikipedia page for this title, 70% of the game. Saying that, these said cutscenes are not the worst, as the comic book look is alright. But once it gets into the 3D rendered scenes, in my honest opinion, kind of drops in quality, as I find the character models not great. And while I'm at it, was I the only one that got tired of just fighting Dio? Because you fight him no less than 9 times, which left me feeling really burnt out pretty quickly, as nearly every fight and encounter feels exactly the same. The only redeeming quality about this game is after you beat the game, you unlock a mode called Dio mode, where, if it's not evident enough already, you play the game as Dio, who is completely broken when playing as him. Oh my god. But that's it really, and it is a shame, as I can see a really good game here, but it's sadly buried under so many questionable choices. Right, I think I'm done talking about this game, as I think if I was to carry on, I'll be here all day.
Oh. Well, that was truly something. And it's a real shame because I honestly wanted to go in and have a completely different opinion for this game. Oh well. Let's move on to the next title. And to be honest, it's a much better one.
All-Star Battle is probably one of the best fighting games I've ever played, and it's a shame that you can't really play this version anymore. But I'm getting ahead of myself. As I just mentioned, this is a fighting game, and unlike the last fighting game I covered, that one only represented one part, this game represents pretty much all parts that was out at the time. So from parts 1 to 8, you can pretty much play as all your favourite current characters, from the classic enemies Jonathan and Dio, to Josuke from part 4, to also Josuke from part 8. Wait, oh shit, some of you are going to get confused by that.
Well done on alienating your audience, mate. Nicely done.
Who let you in? But yeah, every main character is available to play, and it was awesome. The game's visual design is on point too. It's got a unique shell-shaded style that makes every character and background pop up in a shiny way, as well as a nice brushstroke aesthetic that works so well that honestly it's criminal. As for the presentation, just look at this! The effects, the flourishes from the characters, their expressions, the fights, and it's having those manga panel zoom-ins for special attacks. It's just so good. The voice acting is top notch too, for all the actors from the anime came back to voice the characters. With exception, of course, characters from parts 4 to 8, as their parts at the time weren't animated yet. It's still not animated. But I did hear as time went on, the anime voices replaced the in-game ones, which apparently really annoyed some fans, but regardless, I still think everyone sounds great and I believe they did a fantastic job. While I'm on it, I did find it odd that they didn't use the English voice actors in the game for the international releases. It's a small nitpick as the actors were available, but I guess they just couldn't be bothered. Oh well. With gameplay, it's your standard 3D fighting game on a 2D plane. You have your standard light and heavy punches as well as kicks, which you can link them all into some awesome combos. Now, while any special combos you pull off, this does drain your special meter, but it's worth it for the flashy sequences. Speaking of special meter, when you have 1 or 2 charges, you can do 2 types of attacks. The first one is your heart heat attack, and they are your standard but flashy moves when linking combos that take a good chunk of the enemy's health. The second one is a great heat attack, and they are pretty much your ultimate attacks from each individual characters, and they could be considered their signature moves. They are incredibly flashy and all animations are on point. Every character's great heat and heart heat attacks are all unique to that character too. Each stage you fight on has this thing called gimmicks, which you can be seen marked in this red zone line thing? Not sure if there's a technical term for it, but I digress. If you or your opponent are knocked down into these, it triggers a dynamic stage hazard that can damage anyone it gets in its way. As an example, on Part 3's Egyptian level, a car will drive around until it comes back around and runs anyone in its path. A sort of risk to character movement and precision. Another feature I want to mention are the dynamic finishes, which you can trigger by either performing special moves or using the correct character, I think? If I'm being honest, I don't know how to trigger these properly and I think they might be random. They are also nice callbacks to certain moments or key events during the manga.
And it's at this point, I bet you're all wondering, blimey, I've gotten this far, but he hasn't even told me what else I can do in this game. Don't you worry, don't you worry.
He's just building up expectations in order to make this video longer. Ignore him.
I swear to God!
There are many different options to choose from, and those being arcade, story, campaign, versus, practice, custom, and gallery. Arcade is a straightforward series of fights, and at the end you'll get an overall ranking on how well you did during those fights. Story mode is where you get to play through an abridged version of each part, except for JoJo's, which has a weird non-canon side story. Now you can play any part in whichever order you wish, as well as their missions. But the only correct way to play through it is by going in order, as my OCD will kill me if I don't, and anyone else out there who doesn't do this, I'm truly sorry for whatever happened to you, but I'm going to need you to sit down in that little corner over there and understand that it doesn't excuse the person you've become. Moving on to the campaign mode, and sadly there's not a whole lot to say about this, as it was tied to the online servers that no longer exist now. 3 guesses why. Which also means I wasn't able to get any footage for this video. The versus mode is, well, I'd be pretty surprised if you don't know what it is, but it's pretty self-explanatory. Fight your friends or a CPU in a simple battle. Custom mode allows you to customize every character's taunts, voice lines, online profile, and many, many more. Now the last one, gallery mode, is where you get to see all the concept artworks as well as some detailed synopsis on each character in the game, and many, many, many more. Seriously, there's a lot in here and I can't really list them all, but it's all fantastic stuff. Now this is usually the part where I would really recommend you guys to give this game a shot. Unfortunately, as I mentioned a few moments ago, the game's online servers are gone and there's no other way to play this game online, acquiring DLC, etc, etc. So while you can still play this game, you won't be able to do anything online or acquire any cool stuff. Essentially, you can't play this game to its full potential. But don't worry, there is an alternative, and it's a bloody good one. Enter All-Star Battle R, which pretty much is the same game, but remastered. Also, I can't resist this. JoJo no Kimi no Boken, All-Star Battle on. My god, I always wanted to do that. So yeah, you can now play this game properly again, and on all modern consoles. Now, because the game is pretty much the same, there's not a lot of additions I can mention, but they did change quite a few bits here and there. Like tweaks to the UI, which include reworked menus, and the character selection menu too, which was to accommodate all the characters from the previous version and all future DLC characters too. Another change they made was to include this assist system, where you add another character to assist you during battles, and they can be pretty useful. One change I found a little sad was the story and campaign mode being completely gone, and in their place is the All-Star Battle mode, where you just do some canon fights from the respective parts, but they also, just to splice things up, do a lot of what-if fights too. So you can have fights like Cars vs Old Joseph, Young Joseph vs Josuke, Caesar vs Gyro, and the list continues. You have to beat all fights in whichever order you wish to unlock the boss fight of that specific page. Now, I won't lie, while I do like this approach, I can't help but feel sad that the story mode was completely removed. But that's just me. The versus mode has been tweaked too. There's now a single battle, team battle, and tournament mode. Single and tournament mode are pretty self-explanatory, but team battle is like a knockout fight, where you select 3 characters for 3 fights to collect points, and to make things a little more challenging, your health doesn't recover after every fight. Online mode is back, and this time you get missions to complete. You have to meet certain requirements during the fights in order to unlock special costumes, voice lines, etc, etc. Which I found a nice addition to the game. While I've got your attention at the moment, I do want to tell you a little quick story while I was playing online. I don't often play the online battles, but there was this one match where I played as Jotaro and I was up against a fantastic Dio player whose name I can't remember, for which I apologise. We both had victories over each other, however this player brought his A game, which meant I was getting my ass kicked, until suddenly he missed one of his combos and I just unleashed my full fury onto them. And because I had a particular music playing in the background during this fight, this is what it felt like.
But that was just one match, so, you know, don't ask me to join or invite me to join a match because I'm kind of crap. But, you know, still watch out for me playing young Joseph Joestar. But anyway, Kazuya Maiwa! Stop gushing about All-Star Battle and get to Eyes of Heaven already! Toya!
Stop gushing over All-Star Battle and move on to Eyes of Heaven already. Wait a second. How the hell did she...
But that's enough about All-Star Battle for one day, as I've talked about its original on the PS3 as well as its remake. Now, I do recommend both titles to anyone who's a JoJo fan, but just remember going into the PS3 version that nothing is there anymore. No online servers, no DLC, nothing. So you will not get the full experience like I also had. But now let's move on to the final title. Eyes of Heaven.
No, seriously, how the fuck did you know?
When I was getting into JoJo's Bizarre Adventures, like the autistic kid I am, I wanted to consume everything about the series and more. I was soon informed about the other video games and of course wanted to find them all, or those that I could get my hands on. While sadly at the time I couldn't find or acquire any of the more rare ones, I did however find a PS4 game ironically enough in game for a seriously low price of £15. So after getting home that day I started playing this new game, and what I found was, in my personal opinion, while still being very flawed in some places, was the strongest and best JoJo's Bizarre Adventure game out there. Eyes of Heaven is the best story-driven game out there for JoJo, and it's my personal favourite game out of them all, if you couldn't already tell from that AMV I just did a few seconds ago. Anyway, this is an arena fighting game, and upon starting it up, you'll quickly notice that this game looks very similar to All-Star Battle, and that's because the game uses assets from that said game. Nothing wrong with that, as other games have done that also, but I can't deny that it was a little jarring when I later realised. But that doesn't spoil the game at all in my opinion. The first noticeable difference about this game is, as mentioned a few seconds ago, this game has a story mode. An original story at that, and not just another retelling of Part 3. But it does start the story off at the end of Part 3. So, yeah. Anyway, as mentioned a few seconds ago, the story begins right at the end of Part 3 where Dio is finally defeated and everyone's about to go their separate ways. They are suddenly approached by a man who with a familiar face, but also by their recently deceased comrades. I did warn you about the spoilers. After battling with them, and with the help of Speedwagon, that familiar face I just mentioned, breaks a weird spell on Kakyoin, regroups, and this leads our heroes to travel to many different time periods from both the future and the past, as well as alternative timelines in search for the Holy Corpse. And that's as much as the plot as I'll talk about, because any more will spoil pretty much a lot, and also spoil nearly every part of JoJo too, because while I did warn about the spoilers, I am actually trying to not spoil way too much. Plus, I just wanted to point out that the cutscenes are really good, as well as its inclusion of dynamic manga panels in some parts. Just a shame that it isn't throughout the game.
上書きだとわけのわからねえこと言いやがって しかし、あのお方ってのは何者なんだ。エンヤバーやウンドゥールたちが忠誠を誓う存在。いや、まさかな。
Yeah. Yeah. Moving on to the gameplay, as mentioned a few moments ago, this game is a 3D arena fighter, where you and another character of your choice fight 2 more characters on a 2-on-2 battle, but you can have the option for 1-on-1 fights too. Control-wise, it's pretty much the same as All-Star Battle with light and heavy attacks, which of course lead into combos, and with the addition of a jump. There's also a little trigger move that you can perform when pressing L1 to do some flashy attacks. There are also special combo attacks that you can do with your partner called dual combos, as well as the ultimate move called dual heat attacks, which can be awesome to perform and watch, especially when you perform them with specific characters. Seriously, they are really cool. One last thing I need to mention is that when you defeat one of the enemies, their respective partner gets a power boost called Soul Succession, which means they'll be a little more trickier to beat. However, if you or your partner are defeated, it's considered a game over, which is a bit of a letdown really. As I honestly expected it that when my partner got defeated and I'll have to fight the enemies all by myself, only to be met with a game over screen. So yeah, I wasn't happy about that. Another thing I'll mention is that some matches can get a little chaotic, and this will lead you to falling off the maps a few times and losing a good chunk of your health, which happened more times than I can count. So be aware of your surroundings. Moving back to the game, as you progress and win more fights, you earn experience points, and these can be used to level up the characters. There are also additional battles called revenge battles where you get to replay fights on a higher difficulty. There are also some moments during the game where you get to wander around the area and pick up some collectibles and talk to certain characters. I'll be honest and say that the free roaming sections don't offer much, but being able to roam around popular and memorable locations from the manga was such a delight for me that I didn't honestly care. Of course, there's the free battle mode, which is your usual play or practice against the CPU. Weirdly enough, there isn't an option for 2 players to fight offline, and for a fighting game like JoJo, that's an odd thing to leave out. As you can fight other players online, so a 2-player option shouldn't have been that difficult. Once again, like the rest, there's a custom mode for, of course, customization. A shop to buy costume, poses, support items, and to be honest, I think you already know the rest. Lastly, the gallery, where you get to see all the artwork of characters, backgrounds, voice lines, poses, etc, etc. You get it, check out the gallery. Honestly, this game pretty much is the best JoJo game in terms of telling an original story. Because while I do love the other games I've covered for this video, I can't deny that this one just hits differently. With how it tells its story, the way every character has unique dialogue / conversations with one another, as well as the way that they all react to certain moments, the animated cutscenes, the gameplay, and the way Dio slays! By God, man, slay it, baby! Maybe the reason I feel so strongly attached to this one is because it was my first JoJo game, and I'm just biased. Maybe because while, as mentioned previously, I love the other games, but they didn't hit the same notes as this one. Or maybe because I kind of got tired of the developers overusing Part 3 in some of them. Who knows? But one thing I do know is that this game is the closest we'll ever get to a proper crossover special. Seeing everyone together to combat evil like this and having nearly every character have their time to shine, which is why I'd love to see another development team maybe create games based around the other parts. Maybe even take inspiration from the games based around parts 1 and 5 and better improve on them. I mean, come on. I'm not the only one who thought this way. More than anything, I just want more. Probably a little selfish to say, but when you fall in love with another person's work, you can't help but just want to see how it continues and eventually how it ends. Stepping away from the games for a second, JoJo's Bizarre Adventures really did hit a chord with me, and tells a series of stories that, while taking us down some very familiar roads in some parts, how Araki approaches and chooses to tell them is in a very unique way. Unlike other great manga series like Naruto, Dragon Ball, One Piece, Berserk, Bleach, Fairy Tail, or even Tsubasa Reservoir Chronicles, JoJo was something else entirely. The way Araki tells the story through its many parts feels not only a sense of progression with how the characters react and tackle overwhelming obstacles, but also how he really highlights the power of the human spirit when faced with an almost devastating and impossible desire to change one's own destiny. And getting back to the game, this is why I love Eyes of Heaven, as it more or less brings everyone together to tackle what appears to be an impossible fight, as they are pretty much battling a godlike being. And it's also, fundamentally speaking, the long dark shadow to the Joestar family. But in the end, when all hope seems to have faded away, one single gamble saves the day, and once again, change the outcome of the destinies of everyone, in more ways than you think.
If I may be cheesy for a moment here, I truly meant what I said earlier at the beginning of this video, that I wanted to personally thank Dove for recommending me this series, because during that same year, I was going for a tough and rough time. Something I still really can't talk or want to talk about, but to give you guys a gist of where I was mentally, I was in a very dark place. Thankfully, as you can tell, that is no longer the case, because it was thanks to the people within my life and thanks to a simple suggestion from a friend who recommended me to give a series a try. It ignited something within me. It gave me the inspiration and strength to get back on my feet, stand proud, and walk onward. I also would like to thank, personally, everyone who helped me during that time, who gave me support when I really needed it, and to get me back on my feet to walk onwards. Giving me encouragement when I really needed it, to hopefully achieve my goals, and to also have a promising future, which I soon will have. So, to summarize and to end this video on a high note, despite all the flaws and downfalls each game has, you cannot deny the fun, entertaining, and bizarre, unique experience these games give you. And I loved every single one of them. So once again, to everyone who I know personally, and to everyone watching this video right now. Thank you.
Ooh, well, that was a fun video, wasn't it, guys? So, I wonder what I should talk about next. Oh. Well, here we go again. See you next time, guys.